The conference room felt sterile and cold, much like our marriage had become in its final months. I sat across from my soon-to-be ex-wife, watching her manicured nails drum impatiently against the mahogany table. Our lawyers flanked us like referees at a boxing match, though the fight had long since left me. "If we could just finalize these last few items," my attorney said, sliding the papers toward me. I picked up the pen, its weight somehow significant in that moment. 3 years of marriage, reduced to signatures and legal jargon. I glanced up one last time, searching her face for any hint of remorse, any flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with during that corporate retreat in Colorado. Her eyes were fixed on her phone, a small smile playing at her lips. Probably texting him, I thought. The man who'd been my colleague, my friend, the one I'd invited to our barbecues and holiday parties. "Is something wrong?" her lawyer asked, noticing my hesitation. "No," I said quietly, putting pen to paper. "Nothing at all." The signatures took less than 5 minutes. 3 years erased in 300 seconds. As we stood to leave, she finally looked at me directly. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy," she said, her tone suggesting she'd already found her happiness elsewhere. "I'm sure I will," I replied, gathering my things. "Take care of yourself." I walked out of that building into the crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in months. The revelation of her affair 6 months earlier had devastated me initially. Coming home early from a business trip to find evidence of their relationship scattered throughout our home, his cologne in our bathroom, unfamiliar wine glasses in the sink, her phone lighting up with his messages at 3 in the morning. The confrontation had been ugly, filled with accusations and tears, mostly hers when she realized I wouldn't forgive the betrayal. My car was parked 3 blocks away, and I welcomed the walk. The city streets were busy with lunchtime traffic, people rushing between meetings, living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just been legally dismantled. I stopped at a small cafe I'd discovered during one of my many sleepless nights after the separation. The owner, an elderly woman named Rosa, had become something of a confidant. "It's done?" she asked as I approached the counter, reading my expression. "It's done," I confirmed, ordering my usual black coffee. "Good," she said firmly, sliding the cup across to me. "Now you can truly begin again." I spent the afternoon at my apartment, the one I'd moved into after leaving our house. It was smaller, quieter, but it was mine. No shared memories haunted these walls. I'd thrown myself into work these past months, taking on extra projects, volunteering for the assignments no one else wanted. It kept my mind occupied and my bank account healthy. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother. "Heard it's official. Drinks tonight." I smiled and replied, "Absolutely." That evening, surrounded by family and close friends at our favorite downtown bar, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in what seemed like forever. They'd supported me through the darkest days, listened to my pain, and never once said "I told you so," though several of them had never warmed to her. "To new beginnings," my sister toasted, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," we all echoed. I didn't know then that the story wasn't quite finished. That my ex-wife's chapter was just beginning to write itself in ways I couldn't have imagined. I was content to close the book on us and move forward. But life, I would learn, had other plans. As I left the bar that night, walking through streets now familiar and comforting, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. The betrayal still stung, but it no longer consumed me. I was free, truly free, to become whoever I wanted to be next. I had no idea that in just 6 weeks, I would receive an invitation that would change everything. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored and expensive-looking, my name written in elaborate calligraphy. I almost threw it away with the junk mail until I noticed the return address. My stomach tightened as I recognized the street name, her mother's house. Inside was a wedding invitation. My ex-wife was marrying him. The date was set for 6 weeks away at an upscale vineyard outside the city. I stared at the embossed lettering, trying to process what I was reading. 6 weeks. We'd been divorced for barely a month, and she was already remarrying. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, turning the invitation over as if the back might reveal some kind of explanation or apology. There was nothing except the standard RSVP card and a note in her handwriting. "I hope you can find it in your heart to celebrate this new chapter with us." It would mean a lot. I called my brother immediately. She invited me to her wedding. What? His laugh was incredulous. To the guy she cheated with? That's insane. It gets better. It's in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. You've been divorced for what, 5 minutes? I could hear him shaking his head through the phone. Please tell me you're not going. Of course I'm not going, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, something stirred in my chest. Curiosity, maybe, or the desire for closure I hadn't realized I still needed. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Every time I passed it, I found myself pausing, reading it again, trying to understand her motivation. Was this some twisted power move? A way to prove she'd won, that leaving me for him had been the right choice? Or was she genuinely so deluded that she thought we could all be friends now? My sister had a different theory when she came over for dinner that Friday. She's trying to convince herself, she said, pouring us both wine. Getting married this fast, inviting you, it's all about proving she made the right decision. If she can get you to show up and smile and play nice, it validates everything. That's twisted. That's her, my sister replied with a shrug. You know how she always needed everyone's approval. Remember your wedding? She changed the venue 3 times because she was worried about what people would think. She was right. The need for validation had been a constant throughout our marriage. Every decision filtered through the lens of how it would appear to others. I'd found it exhausting. Work provided a welcome distraction. I'd been promoted to senior project manager, finally getting the recognition I'd worked years to achieve. My new team was talented and driven, and we'd just landed a major account. For the first time in my professional life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It was at a client dinner 2 weeks after receiving the invitation that I ran into someone from my past, Jordan, who used to work in the same department as my ex-wife's fiancé. We'd been friendly colleagues before I'd left the company. How have you been? Jordan asked, genuine warmth in their voice. I heard about the divorce.
I'm sorry.
I'm doing well, actually, I said, surprised to find it was true. Really well. We talked for a while about our current projects, the industry, mutual acquaintances. Then Jordan's expression shifted, becoming uncomfortable. Listen, I don't know if I should say this, but given everything. They paused, clearly wrestling with something. Have you heard about what's been going on with him? With who? Your ex-wife's fiancé. Jordan glanced around, lowering their voice. He got fired 3 months ago. There were complaints from multiple women about inappropriate behavior. Nothing criminal, but enough that HR had to act. I felt my stomach drop. What kind of complaints? Harassment. Mostly. Unwanted advances. Inappropriate comments. And there were rumors about him dating multiple people simultaneously, lying to all of them. Jordan looked at me intently. I thought you should know. Especially since I heard they're getting married soon. 6 weeks, I said numbly. Does she know? I have no idea. Jordan squeezed my shoulder.
I'm sorry.
I know this is probably the last thing you wanted to hear, but I'd want someone to tell me. After Jordan left, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, processing this information. Part of me wanted to call her, to warn her. But we were divorced. Her choices were no longer my responsibility. And yet, the thought of her walking into another bad situation, especially so publicly, made me uncomfortable. I drove home with the radio off, my mind racing. The invitation was still on my counter where I'd left it. I picked it up, running my thumb over the embossed letters. Maybe I would go after all. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in the darkness, staring at my ceiling, replaying Jordan's revelation in my mind. My ex-wife's fiancé, a man I'd once considered a friend, had been hiding a pattern of behavior that painted him as someone entirely different from the person I'd thought I knew. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would attend the wedding, not out of spite or revenge, but as a witness. Whatever was going to happen would happen whether I was there or not. But something told me I needed to see this through, to close this chapter completely. I sent in my RSVP, one guest, attending. The weeks that followed were busy. Work consumed most of my time, which I was grateful for. The less I thought about the upcoming wedding, the better. But news filtered through the grapevine nonetheless. She'd chosen an extravagant venue, invited over 200 guests, and was planning what several people described as the wedding of the century. She's compensating, my sister observed when I mentioned it. The bigger and flashier everything is, the less anyone will question whether this is actually a good idea. I bought a new suit for the occasion. Charcoal grey, well-tailored, expensive. If I was going to attend my ex-wife's wedding to the man she'd left me for, I was going to look damn good doing it. 3 days before the wedding, I received an unexpected phone call from Jordan. "I've been thinking about our conversation," they said without preamble. "About what I told you. I think more people need to know the truth about him." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know several women who dealt with his behavior at work. One of them, Sarah, was actually friends with your ex-wife. They used to have lunch together all the time." Jordan paused. I reached out to her. She had no idea they were getting married. In fact, she thought he was still dating someone else. My grip tightened on the phone. Still dating someone else? Yeah. Apparently, he's been juggling multiple relationships. Sarah said she saw him with another woman just last month at a restaurant downtown. She didn't think much of it at the time because she didn't know about the engagement. "Does Sarah know who the other woman was?" Jordan's voice went quiet. "She thinks it might have been your ex-wife's best friend. The maid of honor." The words hit me like a physical blow. Her best friend. The woman who'd been by her side through our entire marriage, who'd probably helped her justify the affair, who was now standing up at her wedding. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. It made a sick kind of sense. "Sarah's pretty certain. She said she recognized her from photos your ex-wife used to have on her desk." After the call ended, I sat in my office, the city spread out before me through floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about all the dinners we'd had with her best friend and her husband, the double dates, the weekend trips, the knowing looks I'd occasionally caught between her friend and him that I'd dismissed as my imagination. I wasn't naive enough to believe that revealing this information would somehow win her back or make her realize what she'd lost. That ship had sailed, and I was genuinely glad it had. But she deserved to know the truth before legally binding herself to another liar. The question was, should I tell her? Or should I let events unfold naturally? I spent the next 2 days in a moral quandary. My practical side argued that her choices were no longer my concern. We were divorced. Whatever mistakes she made now were hers to make. But my conscience kept whispering that knowing something this significant and saying nothing made me complicit in the deception. On the morning of the wedding, I still hadn't decided what to do. I dressed carefully, adjusting my tie in the mirror. The man looking back at me was different from the one who'd signed those divorce papers. Stronger, maybe. More certain of who he was and what he deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "Sarah decided to come to the wedding. She wants to talk to your ex-wife privately before the ceremony. Thought you should know." I stared at the message, my heart rate picking up. So the decision had been made for me. The truth would come out regardless of whether I wanted to be involved. I texted back, "See you there." The drive to the vineyard took 45 minutes. The venue was everything I'd heard it would be, rolling hills covered in grapevines, an elegant stone building with massive windows overlooking the valley, white chairs set up in perfect rows for the outdoor ceremony. Luxury cars filled the parking area. Everyone who was anyone had apparently been invited. I recognized several faces as I made my way toward the main building. Former colleagues, mutual friends, people who'd attended our wedding 3 years ago and were now here to witness her marry someone else. Some looked uncomfortable when they saw me. Others offered sympathetic smiles or small waves. "I can't believe you actually came," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Rachel, a woman who'd been in my ex-wife's book club. She looked genuinely shocked. "Seemed like the right thing to do," I said neutrally. "You're a better person than I would be." She lowered her voice. Between you and me, this whole thing feels rushed. Like she's trying to prove something. Maybe she is. I found my seat, thankfully toward the back, and waited. Guests continued to arrive, the air filled with conversation and anticipation. I spotted Sarah entering with Jordan, both of them looking determined and slightly nervous. And then I saw her. My ex-wife appeared at the top of the stone steps like a vision from a magazine spread. Her dress was elaborate, layers of silk and lace, a cathedral train that required 2 attendants to manage, a veil that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She'd always dreamed of a fairytale wedding, and she'd certainly achieved the aesthetic. But as she descended the steps, I noticed something in her expression. Beneath the professional makeup and practiced smile, there was a tightness around her eyes, a forced quality to her movements. She was nervous, which surprised me. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? The grand gesture, the public declaration that she'd made the right choice? Her best friend stood at the bottom of the steps, radiant in a deep burgundy bridesmaid dress, helping to arrange the train. I watched their interaction carefully, looking for any sign of guilt or discomfort. There was nothing obvious, just 2 friends preparing for a big moment. Either they were both excellent actresses, or Sarah's suspicions were wrong. But I didn't think they were wrong. The processional music began, and guests settled into their seats. I watched as the wedding party made their way down the aisle, groomsmen in black tuxedos, bridesmaids in matching burgundy. Her best friend walked with the best man, her smile wide and seemingly genuine. The groom stood at the altar, looking confident and pleased with himself. I felt a tap on my shoulder. Jordan slid into the seat beside me, looking flushed. Sarah's trying to get a moment alone with her, they whispered. But the wedding coordinator won't let anyone near her. Says the schedule is too tight. What about after? After might be too late. Once she says I do, it becomes a lot more complicated. The bride appeared at the end of the aisle, her father beside her. The music swelled. 200 guests rose to their feet. I stood with them, watching as she began her slow walk toward a future I knew was built on lies. She was halfway down the aisle when I saw Sarah push through the crowd at the side, moving with purpose toward the front. The wedding coordinator noticed, her face alarmed, but Sarah was faster. She reached the first row just as my ex-wife arrived at the altar. "Wait," Sarah called out, loud enough that the music faltered. "Please, wait. I need to say something." The entire vineyard went silent. My ex-wife's face drained of color. Her fiancé looked furious, taking a step forward as if to block Sarah's approach. "Who is this?" the officiant asked, clearly flustered. "This is highly irregular." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm so sorry to do this here, but you need to know something before you go through with this." "Sarah." My ex-wife's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" "I saw him," Sarah said, looking directly at her. "Last month. At Marcella's downtown. He was with someone else. Having dinner, holding hands, kissing. I didn't know about your engagement then, so I didn't think to tell you. But when I found out you were getting married today..." She took a deep breath. "You deserve to know he's been cheating on you." The gasps from the crowd were audible. My ex-wife swayed on her feet, her father grabbing her arm to steady her. The groom's face had gone from furious to panicked. "That's insane," he sputtered. "She's lying. She's clearly confused or..." "I'm not confused," Sarah said firmly. "I know what I saw. And I'm not the only one." Jordan stood up from beside me, their voice carrying across the suddenly electric air. He was fired from his job 3 months ago for harassing multiple women. "The HR files are extensive. I've seen them." Another voice joined in, a woman I didn't recognize from the middle section. "He asked me out 2 weeks ago. I said no, but he was persistent. I had no idea he was engaged." The groom's face had gone from red to white. "These are all lies, jealous people trying to ruin our day." "Which woman was he with at Marcella's?" my ex-wife asked, her voice surprisingly steady despite her trembling hands. She turned to Sarah, her eyes searching. "Did you recognize her?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at the maid of honor, who had gone very still beside the altar. Sarah, my ex-wife repeated, stronger now. Who was she? I think it was. It was me, the best friend interrupted, stepping forward. Her voice was defiant, but tears were streaming down her face. It was me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to. She didn't get to finish. My ex-wife's hand connected with her friend's face with a crack that echoed across the vineyard. The friend stumbled backward, and chaos erupted. The carefully orchestrated ceremony dissolved into pandemonium. Guests surged forward, some trying to comfort my ex-wife, others demanding explanations from the groom. The bridesmaids clustered together in shock, while groomsmen attempted to restore order. The officiant backed away slowly, clearly wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. I remained in my seat, watching it all with a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't satisfaction exactly, or revenge. It was more like watching a car crash you'd seen coming from miles away but had been powerless to prevent. My ex-wife stood at the center of the storm, her elaborate dress suddenly looking ridiculous against the backdrop of betrayal. She turned away from her former best friend and was now facing her fiancé, or whatever he was now. How long? She demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. The crowd quieted, everyone wanting to hear his answer. It doesn't matter. How long? He ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely shattered. A few months. But it's not what you think. We were just. A few months, she repeated, her laugh hollow and broken. You proposed to me 3 months ago. Were you sleeping with her then? His silence was answer enough. She turned to her former friend, who was being supported by another bridesmaid, a red mark blooming across her cheek. You stood there and helped me plan this wedding. You helped me pick out this dress. You listened to me talk about how happy I was, how I'd finally found real love. Her voice cracked. How could you? I tried to stop, the friend sobbed. I tried to end it so many times, but he kept saying he was going to break up with you anyway, that he really loved me, that. Get out, my ex-wife said quietly. Both of you. Get out of my sight. The groom reached for her. We can talk about this. We can work through. Don't touch me. She jerked away from him, nearly tripping over her train. Her father caught her, and she collapsed against him, the fight suddenly draining out of her. Please just go. Please. I watched as the groom and the former best friend were escorted away by security, their protests fading as they disappeared into the main building. The remaining guests stood in uncomfortable clusters, unsure whether to leave or stay. The wedding coordinator was on her phone, presumably cancelling the reception that would never happen. I stood, intending to slip away in the confusion, but movement caught my eye. My ex-wife had seen me. Our eyes met across the ruins of her wedding, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, to my surprise, she began walking toward me, her father releasing her arm reluctantly. She stopped a few feet away, mascara running down her face, her perfect makeup destroyed by tears. Up close, I could see she was shaking. You knew, she said. It wasn't a question. I found out a few days ago, I admitted. I wasn't sure what to do with the information. But you came anyway. Why? I considered the question, searching for the right words. Because I needed to see it through. To know that this chapter was really closed. She laughed bitterly, gesturing at the chaos around us. Well, it's definitely closed now. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small in the enormous dress. I suppose you're enjoying this. Your revenge. This isn't revenge, I said honestly. I didn't plan any of this. People who cared about you stepped forward because they thought you deserved to know the truth. That's not revenge. That's kindness, I guess. In a brutal sort of way. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I was so sure I'd made the right choice. Leaving you, choosing him. I was so sure. I know you were. I threw away 3 years of marriage for this. For him. And it was all a lie. She looked at me with something like desperation. Did he ever love me? Was any of it real? I could have been cruel. Could have told her what I really thought, that she'd been a conquest, a prize to be won from another man, that whatever he'd felt had likely been ego more than love. But looking at her broken expression, I found I didn't have the heart for it. I don't know, I said instead. Maybe at first. People are complicated. She nodded slowly, wiping at her face with shaking hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything I put you through. For the affair, for how I ended things, for all of it. The apology I'd once desperately wanted now felt anticlimactic. I realized I'd already moved past needing it. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I hope you figure things out. I turned to leave, and she called after me. Are you happy now? Without me? I paused, considering the question seriously. Yeah, I said, surprised by how true it felt. I really am. As I walked back toward the parking area, I heard her father speaking softly to her, beginning the process of damage control that would occupy the next several hours. Other guests were streaming toward their cars, phones already out, probably spreading the story across social media. Jordan caught up with me at my car. That was intense. That's one word for it, I agreed. Do you think she'll be okay? I thought about the woman I'd married, the one who'd needed constant validation and approval. Eventually. She's resilient in her own way. And maybe this will teach her something about rushing into things to prove a point. What about you? How are you feeling? I unlocked my car, breathing in the cool vineyard air. The sun was beginning to set, painting everything in golden light. Despite the drama, it really was a beautiful location. I feel free. Like I've finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying without realizing it. The drive home was peaceful. I stopped at Rosa's cafe, finding her still there despite the late hour. How did it go? She asked, taking in my formal attire. It went exactly how it needed to, I said. Can I get a coffee? She smiled, already reaching for a cup. On the house. You look like you've had quite a day. That night, I sat in my apartment, my new suit jacket hung carefully in the closet, a cup of coffee growing cold on the table beside me. I thought about the man I'd been 3 years ago, falling in love and believing in forever. I thought about the man who'd discovered the affair, whose world had crumbled in an instant. And I thought about who I'd become in the months since, stronger, more independent, more certain of my own worth. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. I heard what happened. You okay? I smiled, typing back, better than okay. Ready to move forward. And I was. The story that had begun with betrayal and ended with a spectacular public implosion was finally over. Not because I'd sought revenge or orchestrated some grand comeuppance, but simply because truth has a way of surfacing eventually, and consequences have a way of finding us all. I thought about my ex-wife, probably still at the vineyard, dealing with cancelled vendors and gossiping guests and the wreckage of her fairytale fantasy. I felt sorry for her, but I didn't feel responsible for her anymore. She'd made her choices, just as I'd made mine. The next morning, I woke up to texts from people I hadn't heard from in years, all asking about the wedding. Apparently, the story had spread quickly through our social circles. I responded to a few, ignored most, and then put my phone away. I didn't want to relive it or analyze it or dissect it with curious acquaintances. Instead, I went for a run through my neighborhood, let the autumn air clear my head, and stopped for breakfast at a new place I'd been wanting to try. I sat by the window, watching people rush by with their morning coffees and Monday concerns, and felt grateful to be just another person living their life, no longer defined by someone else's betrayal. Later that week, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop downtown. She looked relieved to see me. I've been worried I made things worse, she admitted. Causing a scene like that. You told the truth, I said. What she did with that information was up to her. You gave her a choice she wouldn't have had otherwise. Have you heard from her? No. I don't expect to. That chapter's closed for both of us. Sarah nodded, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Jordan told me you handled everything with a lot of grace. That takes strength. I shrugged. Or maybe just exhaustion. I was tired of carrying anger around. It's heavy. As the weeks passed, the story of the collapsed wedding faded from immediate gossip into occasional recalled drama. I heard through the grapevine that my ex-wife had moved back in with her parents temporarily, that her former best friend had left town, that the groom had already been spotted with someone new. None of it mattered to me anymore. I focused on work, on friends, on rebuilding the life I wanted rather than the one I'd fallen into. I went on a few dates, nothing serious, just testing the waters of who I might want to be in a new relationship. I traveled, took up photography, learned to cook properly instead of subsisting on takeout and frozen meals. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I was contacted by a small publishing house. Someone had heard about the story, the specifics didn't matter, and wanted to know if I'd be interested in sharing my perspective on divorce, betrayal, and moving forward. I declined politely. This was my story, but I didn't need to profit from it or put it on display. Some endings don't need to be shared. They just need to be lived through and learned from. I think about that day at the vineyard sometimes, about the woman in the elaborate dress learning truths she'd tried so hard to avoid. I hope she found her way to peace eventually, to a place where she could be honest with herself about what she wanted and why. As for me, I found something better than revenge or vindication. I found myself again, the person I'd lost somewhere in trying to make a failing marriage work. And that, I realized, was the real closure I'd been seeking all along. The invitation still sits in a drawer somewhere in my apartment, a reminder of the day everything fell apart for her and came together for me. Not because I'd orchestrated her downfall, but because I'd finally learned that my happiness didn't depend on her suffering, or on her at all. I was free. Truly, finally free. And that was more than enough.